Thank you. That was a great intro. Thanks, Janice. How many people in here used a doorknob today? It's not a trick question, really. Put your hands up if you used a doorknob. Okay, thanks. I want you to think very carefully about that doorknob you used. I want you to close your eyes if you need to. See if you can picture it in your mind. Did you notice the color of that doorknob? Did you notice the texture, the way it felt in your hand? Do you remember which direction you had to turn that knob in order to open the door? And when you turned that knob, do you remember thinking about, or have you ever thought about how that doorknob really works? All of the parts and the mechanisms involved in engaging that door so it opens. Well, a few weeks ago, I asked myself these questions. I was kind of thinking about my morning routine, thinking about all of the things that I do from the time I roll out of bed in the morning at 6:15 to the time I leave my house for work. And yes, I had used a doorknob that day. And I could remember the color, and I could remember the finish. I couldn't remember which direction I turned the handle, but more importantly, I realized I had never really thought about how that doorknob works. The fact is, we live in a designed world, and I want to talk today about the relationship that we have with those designs. The bike routes that we use, the ways that we engage with our colleagues, how we communicate with them, the emails that we use, the ways that we, whether we hold face-to-face meetings. I want to talk about our relationship with design and the made dimension of our world. And I want to talk a little bit about where I'm coming from first. For the past few years, I've worked on a research project at the Harvard Graduate School of Education called Agency by Design. And my colleagues and I have been focused in particular on the relationship between the maker movement and complex thinking and contemporary theories of learning, and the ways that young people engage with making and design experiences. And we've done a lot of interviews, and we've done a lot of literature reviews and gone on a lot of site visits, and we've culled a lot of what we've learned and a lot of what we've read down to these core ideas about maker empowerment, these core ideas about a certain disposition, a certain way of being, a certain approach that you have in your world. And this is not about particular instances of learning or instances of making. It's about a tendency, a way you see yourself, a way you see your world. And though we are surrounded by these designs, I think we've become less and less engaged with them. We've become more and more distanced from the made aspect of our world. So I want to talk about how we can reconnect with that design, and I want to talk about the power that has to allow us to affect change on our world through design. So this idea of maker empowered, what does this mean? And I have to say we're still working through these ideas, so this is very much a work in progress, so kind of welcome you to our thought processes. But there are really two elements involved in becoming maker empowered, and one is that you have a heightened sensitivity to design. So you're paying attention to the fact that many of the things that you engage with on a day-to-day basis are in fact designed, whether it's the shoes that you're wearing, the sweater you have on, the way you get to work in the morning, the systems that you use throughout the day. These are in fact designed. And not only that they're designed, but also that they have particular qualities or particular characteristics of design. So while one element of being maker empowered is to have a heightened sensitivity to design. The next is to have an inclination to tinker. And inclination is a little bit different than skill. It's a little bit different than ability. It's about a tendency, a way that you approach your world. And so an inclination to tinker is really about learning your world through deconstructing, learning your world through playing with materials, learning and knowing your world through really getting in there and figuring things out and being okay to explore and being okay to experiment. And in some ways, you have to allow yourself permission to do that. You have to allow yourself permission to mess something up and be okay taking it apart, even if you can't get it back together again. Null and void those warranties that come with the objects and really play around with these items. So being maker empowered is about having a heightened sensitivity to design and having an inclination to tinker. I think maker empowered and being maker empowered probably looks different to you and me, depending on where we're coming from, depending on the skills that we bring, the experiences that we have. So just to get us all on the same page here, I'm going to offer a scenario. I want you to imagine that you bought an IKEA show rack, and a couple months in, of course, a few of the legs break. You have a couple of options here. You could throw the shoe rack away and call IKEA and order a new one. You could see if you can get 2 replacement legs. So maybe IKEA can, send you 2 legs. You can salvage the rack, but somehow repair it. You could see if maybe there's a different shoe storage system for you. Maybe the shoe rack isn't the answer for your shoes. You could see if you could rig a fix yourself, grab some duct tape and see if you could wrap it around those legs. Or you could see if you could replicate those 2 legs. Maybe you could grab a tool and try to fix 2 new ones or try to create 2 new ones. The point here is not really about which option you choose, it's about why you choose that particular option. It's about paying attention to how you approach your world, how you engage with those designs, and why you engage in that way. So we're going to try something today. I want us to think a little bit, not just about this inclination, but about getting to the point of how we might be able to support these ways of thinking. I don't think you can give somebody maker empowerment, but I think you can try to support these kinds of ways of thinking. So we're going to break with TED tradition a little bit, and we're going to try a participatory activity. And I am going to ask you to turn to somebody next to you, preferably somebody you didn't come with, but if you can, find somebody near you. We're going to try to do this fairly quickly. Find one object between the 2 of you that you're going to spend a little time with. It may be one of the objects similar to what's on the screen, or it may be something new that you decide to look at. And I want you to spend a lot of time looking very closely at this object. This ties into this idea of developing a sense of sensitivity, developing heightened sensitivity. Spend some time with this object. Notice all of its parts. Notice all of its purposes. And you can think about the purposes of those parts or the purposes of the whole, and then notice some of those complexities. So I'm going to have you do this for a few minutes, and then I'm going to attempt to pull everybody back together. Okay, go. How was that? Great. Awesome. So that worked. We came back together. So this is called a thinking routine because the goal is just that. It's to get you to thinking like this on a day-to-day basis. Whenever you have an object that you're working with, whenever you have a system that you're engaged with, really think closely about that and think critically about that. How does that work in your life? What are the various parts of it? What are the various purposes of that object and how you use that? So parts, purposes, and complexities. The fact is, we live in a designed world. We're surrounded by these designs, and yet I think we've become more and more distanced from them. We don't often think about how our objects are made. We don't often think about the materials that go into the creation of them, the factories that they're made in, who makes them, how they get from there to here, the transportation system involved. And I think that this, in some ways, isn't our fault. We've become enabled to disengage with our design world. In fact, there are industries built off our tendency to be disengaged. We've got Facebook that tells us what to like, and even these days is telling us what to buy through its ads. There are apps out there that tell us what we should try and what we don't need to try. Kind of alleviates the risk-taking factor for us, telling us what to do. Google Maps tells us where to go and how to get there, and even when we've gotten off path. So a lot of times there's really no need to know where we are in time or space because there's an app for that. But so what? If we can get by without paying attention to the design in our world, why should we care? Why should we pay attention to this? Why should we do activities and thinking routines like parts, purposes, and complexities? Well, I think that in some ways, becoming more in tune with your designed world allows you to make better choices. And I don't mean better in the sense of good or bad. I mean better in the sense of being more in line or more aligned with the choices and your purposes and your goals. So let's take this drawer, for example. If you're interested in purchasing a new desk, let's say, and your particular priority in this purchase was aesthetics, you're interested in the materials used, you're interested in the craftsmanship, in the quality of the work, this would be a good choice. This would be in line with that aesthetic purpose. If, on the other hand, you're interested in purchasing a new coffee cup, but your priority for that coffee cup is not aesthetics, it's instead user experience, and you're particularly interested in the way the coffee cup feels in your hand, the way you take that sip of coffee, in the morning after you wake up. This is probably not the best choice. So you can imagine there are different choices, and how you pay attention to those choices is very important as you go through your world. And remember that doorknob? Well, a few weeks ago, my colleagues and I took this doorknob out to California, and we did this workshop with some educators that we partner with, and we had them do the parts, purposes, and complexities, and spend some time looking, and like me, they realized they had never really thought about how a doorknob works. They had never really thought about, the doorknob without the door in the middle, having the two parts on either side, and how those parts and mechanisms work together. And it was a very powerful moment for them. And then we gave them some tools. And we gave them some pliers, and they took that doorknob apart. And Alex here was so fascinated by everything. This was kind of an aha moment for him. And remember that IKEA shoe rack? Well, that one's mine. And maybe I'll redesign the shoe storage system, or maybe I'll get a lesson out in the barn on a table saw, and I'll learn how to make a few new legs. But the chances are, whatever path I take at this point, I am not going to throw this away and call IKEA for a new one. So maker empowered. Empowered to deconstruct and construct your world, empowered to look closely, empowered to think critically about what you use and why you use it, empowered to affect change on your world through design because you understand how things work and because you understand why things are designed the way they are. We live in a designed world. From our doorknobs to the way you communicate with your staff and those bike routes to my IKEA shoe rack. Are these the best designs? Here's my challenge for you today. Notice your world of design. Think about everything that you engage with, those objects, those systems, those routines, and ask yourself, are these the best designs? Could these things be designed differently? Thank you. Thanks.